Good evening and welcome to CNN Money Switzerland. I'm Hannah Wise with the latest news headlines this Tuesday. The International Monetary Fund is predicting the worst recession since the Great Depression. Its global economic outlook predicts a contraction of 3% in 2020, with not much of a rebound in 2021. That's assuming as well that the impacts of the crisis will fade in the second half of this year. If they are prolonged, we can expect a further 3% contraction in 2020. Yet another Swiss bank is planning to split its 2019 dividend payments. Julius Baer is following the likes of UBS and Credit Suisse, who have both also bowed to pressure from regulator FINMA. Julius Baer also said it will push back its AGM meeting until May the 18th. Swiss pension funds are also feeling the pinch due to coronavirus crisis. According to calculations from UBS, the average monthly performance across the sector is minus 5.61% in March. That's after deducting fees. Not one of the 70 or so Swiss pension funds that were surveyed performed positively. Foreign stocks were the worst performing asset class, while alternative investments did significantly better than stocks and bonds overall. We'll be talking about ESG in just a moment. President Trump has threatened to cut US funding to the World Health Organization over its handling of the coronavirus crisis. But responding to that threat last night, the chief of the organization said he had spoken to President Trump recently and that he was supportive of the organization and that he hoped funding would continue. As Austria becomes the latest country to ease lockdown restrictions, the World Health Organization, however, is warning against easing those restrictions too quickly, saying any action taken too fast could spark another wave of the crisis.
While COVID-19 accelerates very fast, it decelerates much more slowly. In other words, the way down is much slower than the way up. That means control measures must be lifted slowly and with control. It cannot happen all at once.
Well, here in Switzerland, more than 25,000 people have now contracted the coronavirus, with 900 deaths now confirmed. Now, it was a move that was supposed to balance oil prices. They've been dropping rapidly since the virus first broke out, but a commitment to cut output by nearly 10 million barrels a day by OPEC plus countries in May and June has done little to stop oil prices dropping further. CNN's John Defterios reports.
An historic cut by the OPEC plus group of nations, but an underwhelming response in the oil market itself. There's a realization that about 3 billion people around the world are locked in, and this is having a profound impact on demand, which is said to be dropping by a third in the month of April, or about 30 million barrels. Having said that, the OPEC plus cut is substantial, just under 10 million barrels a day, and they're hoping for a drop in output by the major industrialized countries and others outside of OPEC, like the United States, Norway, Canada, Brazil, and even Indonesia, to the tune of, say, 5 million barrels a day. And they're also hoping that the major industrialized countries within the G20 will purchase excess supplies to put into their strategic petroleum reserve. Right now, however, the market is focused on the drop in growth in the second quarter, a global recession, and that perhaps spilling into the third quarter as well. But between now and the end of 2020, the OPEC plus cuts alone will take about 2 billion barrels off the market and raise prices, analysts say, above $40 a barrel. Not too hot to kill off a recovery, and not too cold to push more oil producers out of the global market. John Defterios, Abu Dhabi.
Well, political calendars around the world have been disrupted during the COVID-19 pandemic, but South Koreans are now set to cast their ballots tomorrow in elections, becoming the first nation, in fact, to hold a major election during the pandemic. CNN's Paula Hancock reports.
Queue at least 1 metre apart, have your temperature checked, sanitise your hands, put on disposable gloves, and then vote. This is a South Korean parliamentary election during a pandemic. More than a quarter of the electorate came for early voting last Friday and Saturday, a record to avoid the crowds on Election Day Wednesday. President Moon Jae-in was one of them. This election, seen as a mid-term referendum for him and his party. More than 14,000 polling stations will be disinfected regularly. For those who tested positive for coronavirus, they were encouraged to vote by mail before the end of March. If you tested positive after that date, you then vote at 8 special polling stations, so long as your symptoms are mild. If you're in quarantine, you can vote in the hour after polls close, but only if you're symptom-free.
Science, technology.
When it comes to campaigning, some of it was virtual, but most of it was not.
It feels like it has been a long time since I saw a crowd like this in central Seoul. It is packed with media, supporters and candidates. Nothing about that crowd really says social distancing to me at this point. But what we're hearing from candidates is they still have to campaign and they still have to try and get as many votes as possible.
Following one ruling party candidate, the mask was on and off, as were the gloves, and physical contact was frequent.
So-called non-verbal language can have more of an impact than spoken words. This election has a certain limitation for us to use non-verbal language.
But as a candidate, when a supporter wants to hug you, it's very hard to say no. Officials don't believe turnout will be affected too much, borne out by those we spoke to on the streets of Seoul. This construction worker says Korea has had elections even during wartime, so I think the election should go ahead as planned. This mother says, I had no choice but to come out today to get school books for my daughter, but I'm keeping social distance from others, so I think I should be okay on the election date. With close to 44 million registered voters, this election is a big test for South Korea and its efforts to fight the virus. And countries around the world, pegged for their own elections this year, will be watching very closely. Paula Hancock's CNN Seoul.
Now, I know you'll have heard of greenwashing, where certain products are made to look a little more beneficial for the climate or for the environment than they necessarily are. But have you heard of green wishing? Now, this is a term that's used to describe hope that post-coronavirus, investors and governments will be tapping into ESG funds and companies that do good in order to rebuild our economies. For more, I spoke to Rebecca's head of sustainable integration on the challenge that lies ahead.
Our response to what has happened is the most important. So our governments, when they are going to stimulate the economies, are they going to go back to the traditional stimulus of certain, let's say, more pollutive industries, or are they going to try to take this opportunity to really, green the economy, stimulate towards green jobs, inclusivity, affordable healthcare, affordable clean energy, sustainable cities, and that is indeed, what is going to determine how our economies will evolve over the next few decades. This crisis makes it a little bit more visible that if we stop traveling a lot, that if we stop disposing of a lot of waste, that really, we have clearer skies, we have more clear water, and that is what it shows.
Isn't that just wishful thinking, though, that we can be different?
I recently came across we have greenwashing, looking more sustainable than we are, trying to look more sustainable than we are, and we have green wishing, which indeed is wishful thinking that we can actually solve all these issues and that we can change, and that is why I say the response to this crisis is going to determine whether or not we're going to achieve this or not.
Will governments be motivated?
Yeah, that depends, I think, on government for government. I think in Europe, we have committed, many countries, or most of the countries in the world have committed to the Paris Climate Agreement, and we still need to do a lot of action there.
But what has actually changed during the coronavirus crisis to make people change their minds?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most important things is that we see that companies, when they had to, finally gave in to say, okay, people can work from home. People can be more flexible in terms of when they have to care for their children, like we all have to do when working from home. And all these kind of things accidentally also are good for the environment with less travel. They're good for inclusivity and diversity, because people with children, if they have more flexible working arrangements, they can actually, participate more in the working environment. So these things accidentally lead to companies realizing that, that they can be more sustainable than they are now. Second thing is that we see that companies are actually now, some of them are actually changing their production processes to really make products to help, like masks and ventilators. So companies feel that they can be relevant for society. Of course, they will make money with that, but also they can show that they are willing to provide these products that really help people.
But will that last post-crisis, though? I mean, there won't be the need for ventilators and the need for masks.
And that is the big question. And I think this is what investors need to make sure that they keep on emphasizing to companies, that they find it important that they make not only good financial returns, but that they also maybe limit negative non-financial returns, or maybe improve non-financial returns. And by non-financial, I mean achieving, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals.
And Formula E, much like many of our other sports these days, has been plagued by coronavirus, from uncertainties to if and when the series will restart, to where future financing will come from. Top Swiss Formula E driver Edoardo Mortara speaks to Matt Layton now about what the current crisis means for the future of his sport.
Edo, really tough times. How are you managing your day-to-day life?
Well, it's in this difficult situation. I'm living in Switzerland, so I have the chance actually in Switzerland, we have the chance to go out of the house. So whenever I can and whenever I want, I can go out, jog a little bit, or take my bike, go for a ride. Apart from that, pretty much like staying at home and also using my driving simulator in order to stay fit as a driver. But yeah, I've never known anything like this, and the worst about the situation is that we don't know when it's gonna finish, when it's gonna be over. I think this is the worst.
And have you heard any stories about any of the teams suffering, or any of the sponsors pulling out, or is it too early to say?
Yeah, for sure. You hear a lot of like rumors, like in the paddock. For sure, for the sponsors also, like it's not a nice moment. Obviously, they are paying to have, let's say, they're paying to have some media coverage and during the race weekends. And obviously, when you don't have like race weekends, they have nothing. So some of them are deciding not to pay. If they're not paying the teams, the teams cannot survive actually. And you hear a lot of rumors. I heard that in Formula One, for example, like some like Formula One teams are struggling.
The Formula E in the last year has really taken off. Do you think the possibility of terminating the season, is it really going to put financial pressures on some of the teams?
I think it's very early to say. We don't know when this situation will be over. When the championship will have the possibility to carry on, if we are going to be able to carry on this season. I think it's too early to say. There are a lot of rumors, a lot of ideas. If we have the possibility to go racing again this year, where we're going to go.
As a top level athlete, you rely on sponsors, you rely on different payments. How's that managing yourself?
Basically, motorsport is relying, on sponsors, on people financing our activities. We will have to adapt, I think, in the future in order for our sport, to survive. And I don't know what it will mean, but for sure we will all have to make some sacrifices in order for our sport, our passion, to live on.
Well, that's you all up to date this Tuesday from CNN Money Switzerland. Remember, everything is available on our website, cnnmoney.ch. Bye-bye.